Okay guys, today we're going to do 1.6, other types of equations. So a polynomial equation results from setting two polynomials equal to each other. The equation is in standard form if one side is 0 and the polynomial on the other side is in descending order. So we want the polynomial on the other side to be in descending order. So this is descending order. If we have x, something like this, it doesn't necessarily have to be this, but we want like x to the 5th plus 3x to the 4th plus 7x to the 3rd plus 2x squared plus 5x plus 9 equals 0. So you can see our exponents go from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1, and then this one is x to the 0, which is just 1. So we always want them to be stepping down, just like think about it like going down steps. We want it to descend, okay? So the degree of a polynomial is the highest degree or power of any variable in the equation. So the degree is the highest exponent of any variable in the equation. So the degree of this polynomial, our sample, it would be 5. So our degree here would be 5. Now the leading coefficient is the coefficient in front of the variable with the highest degree. So in this case up here, it would be 1, okay? So our leading coefficient would equal 1, and that's for this, just our sample one. Let's look at our examples here and figure out what each thing is. What is the highest degree and the leading coefficient? Write it in descending order. So first of all, let's look for our highest degree, okay? So out of example 1, our highest degree. So we have 4x squared plus 2x plus x to the 4th plus 7. So what would the highest degree be? Well, 4 is our highest exponent, so our highest degree for this one would be 4. And then let's look for our leading coefficient. Our leading coefficient is always in front of our variable with the highest exponent, so it would be 1. Our leading coefficient. And now to write this in descending order, we would write our highest exponent first, so it's going to be x to the 4th. And then we look for our next highest, which would be plus 4x squared. Our next would be with the 1 exponent, so plus 2x, and then plus 7. So this would be our descending order. Now let's do the same for our next one. Our highest degree, this is a 2, this is a 0, yes, and this is a 3, so it would be 3. Our leading coefficient would be 3. And then to write it in descending order, we'd write the 3 first, so 3x to the 3rd minus 9x squared plus 5. So it would step down from 3 to 2. We don't have a 1, so we'd go directly to 0. Okay, so the next one says solve the polynomial equation by factoring. So if we will remember from the last lesson, the first thing that we want to do is to write it in standard form. So let's do that. Gotta have to think back to the last lesson. So in standard form, we're going to move this over and get it to equal 0, right? We have this. We want to 0 on one side and the polynomial in descending order. So let's subtract 27x squared. One side you do to the other. So we're going to have 3x to the 4th minus 27x squared equals 0. Okay. So we have it 0 on one side, descending order on the other, so we're perfect there. Back to the last lesson. Second is to factor completely, so let's factor. Remember, we always look for the greatest common factor first. So let's see what our greatest common factor here is. What do they both have in common? Well, they have a 3, right? 3, they're both divisible by 3, and they also both have an x squared. So 3x squared would be their greatest common factor. So let's factor a 3x squared out of both of them. Take 3x squared from 3x to the 4th, we're left with x squared. We take 3x squared from 27x squared, we're left with a 9. Our next step is to go to 0 and solve, which is simplify. So we're going to set both factors equal to 0. Squared minus 9 equals 0. So to set this one equal, we're going to divide by 3. If you remember, 0 divided by anything is always 0. How do we get rid of a square? That's right, we square root it. Square root of 0 is always 0. We do the plus minus, but there's really not a plus minus of 0, so x equals 0. Now if you'll remember back to the last lesson, this is the difference of two squares. X is squared and 9 is the square of 3, right? 3 squared is 9. Now you're going to get a plus minus of 3. But let's do this. How do we get rid of a square? We're going to square root. Oh, got ahead of myself, sorry. Start back over, sorry. All right, so we're going to add 9 to both sides. And then we're going to have x squared equals 9. Now, we're going to take the square root of both sides. Sorry about that. So, square undoes a square root, and we're going to have x equals plus minus 3. So here is our other answer. And we always want to check these, so let's do that. And check them in the original, so if we plug 0 in, let's start with 0. This is our x equals 0. To the 4th power equals 27 times 0 squared. We can do this on your calculator if you want. On this side, maybe you'll be able to see it. Okay, there we go. So if we say 3, 0, raised to the 4th power, that equals 0. And then we can do the 27 times 0 squared. That equals 0. So 0 equals 0. We can just put a little tick mark here, and he's good. And we can do that for a positive 3. If you have a calculator like this, you can go back up and grab this. You get your arrow on that and you just hit enter. It'll bring it back down again and make it active. Then you can just arrow over to where your 0 was and enter your 3. Okay? Hit enter again and it's going to give you 243. That's your answer for 3 to the 4th power. Now go back up to your other one. Hit enter again. It brings it down and makes it active. Arrow back over and enter 3. And that gives you x equals 3. That's good. Okay? Now we can do the same thing for a negative 3. There's one more step though. So arrow up. Don't get too excited. Oops, sorry. Hit enter. So we're going to arrow over to the 3, but you have to hit second and then insert, which is the delete button, and then you can hit the negative. Okay? And it's also a 243. Do the same thing for this one. Hit enter. Arrow over to your 3. Second insert, put in your negative, hit enter, and it's 243. So for x equals negative 3, that's also good. So we know both of those are good now, so we can move on. Once again, we need to write this one in standard form, so let's start with that. So we'll want to move these over, so we'll have a 0 on this side. So let's subtract 4x and subtract 4. We do to one side, we always do to the other. This is going to give us a 0, so we're going to have x cubed plus x squared minus 4x minus 4 equals 0. Now if you'll think back to when we were doing the AC method, we factored by grouping. So when we factor this, we're going to factor by grouping. And we're going to do by grouping. So we're going to group these two and then these two. But remember, when you factor by grouping, you always have to put a little plus here so that you remember that it's addition. So now we're going to find the greatest common factor of this group. So our greatest common factor here is going to be x squared. It's always the less of the two. When we take x squared from x cubed, that leaves us an x. X squared from x squared leaves us 1. Greatest common factor from 4x, negative 4x, and negative 4 is obviously negative 4. When we take that from negative 4x, that leaves us an x. And when we take negative 4 from negative 4, that gives us a positive 1. All this equals 0. So if you remember, when these are the same, that becomes a factor. So x plus 1 is one factor, and then what's on the outside becomes a factor. So x squared minus 4 is our other factor. So now our third step is to set equal to 0 and solve. So we're going to set x squared minus 4 equals 0 and x plus 1 equals 0. So let's add 4 to both sides. Squared equals 4. We get rid of a square. Absolutely. We square root both sides. So that's going to be x equals plus minus, what's the square root of 4? 2. Minus. So don't ever write your square root sign again, right? Because once you take the square root of 4 and it becomes 2, you've done that operation, so you lose the square root. Subtract 1 from both sides, so x equals negative 1. So here's this answer, here's this answer. So let's check these. Do it with your calculator, that's so much easier. So let's do, well, when we plug something in, we always plug it in parentheses. So we're going to say negative 1 raised to the third power plus negative 1 squared. So that gives us 0, okay? And then do the 4 times negative 1 plus 4 gives us 0. So negative 1 is good. Let's put a tick mark by him. Your x, let's do positive 2 first. So let's do 2 raised to the third, 2 squared. We get 12. Now let's say 4 times 2 plus 4, and that gives us 12. So we're good. Now let's go back up here. We could just do this, and then we can remember to always hit your second insert and put your negative in. Go over to this 2, hit second insert and put your negative in, okay? So that gives us a negative 4. Now we'll go up to this one, hit enter and make it active again. Go over to your 2, second insert, put your negative in. And that's negative 4. So we're good on both of those. What I should have told you on the last one, and I forgot to, Don't leave your x like this. Let's do x equals, say, -1, -2, and 2. However you write it, make sure that it's like written to where you don't leave it plus minus. And I should have said that on the last one. I'm sorry I didn't.